Hello again YouTube, welcome to the Card Combo Show with me, CHADley, where I look at the weird and wonderful card combinations in the Final Fantasy TCG. And this week I'm going to be looking at quite a niche selection of cards. So backups that have action abilities to retrieve cards from the break zone, either play them onto the field or back into your hand. So the cards I'm looking at this week are CHADley from Opus 16, Samurai from Opus 16, Gladiator from Opus 4, Summoner from Opus 6, and finally Doned from Opus 11. Right, first up we have the Chadmeister, who's a 4 CP lightning backup. When CHADley enters the field, place 2 research counters on CHADley. Dull, remove 1 research counter from CHADley, choose 1 forward in your break zone, add it to your hand. So some people would prefer to run the likes of Zemus or maybe even the Lightning Sage, but CHADley has a sort of delayed gratification side to him, so he does ultimately have to be dull to use his ability, so that does kind of half increase his cost, so to speak, to be able to get those things back, but you can use it whenever you want, and I think there's a lot of power in that. So, S abilities. Basically, here's a fantastic card if you want to double down on using an S ability. So, for example, Walker, fantastic S. So you have Walker on the field, you use his S ability, which is only a water and an S. And this is where CHADley is also really good, because the fact that as long as the forward that he has an S ability doesn't require itself to become dull, then you can use the S basically twice. So you pay 1 water, use Walker's S, you get to choose a forward, lose his abilities, break. Dull CHADley, get that Walker back, use it again. So really, really useful. Similar sort of thing with Gilgamesh as well. So Gilgamesh has a decent S ability, although it's not really as played these days, but I still really like it, to be honest. But yeah, at the end, until the end of the turn, Gilgamesh doubles its power and gains first strike and brave. Gilgamesh can attack twice this turn. You can use the ability only during your turn, so you can't use it as a defensive mechanism, but you can, hopefully if he survives, use Gilgamesh's S a couple of times every couple of turns. So use it, attack twice, following turn, use it again, attack twice, so you can see where I'm going. Basically, you can kind of read it as pay 3 lightning for Gilgamesh in this instance, because you are dulling CHADley, and then the 2 lightning, and then the S, which you got back from CHADley. Ject, and this is, I think there's a lot of power in this one. Having Ject on the field and eject in your break zone, provided your opponent doesn't have some form of emptying a break zone, and even then, provided you can use CHADley, it's not so bad. But if your opponent sees that you've got Ject on the field, CHADley open, and eject in your break zone, they realise that they're in a bit of a sticky situation because you're able to cancel so many effects. So they're gonna, I imagine your opponent at that point will probably try and do things staggered. So do one thing, let it resolve, do another thing, let it resolve. But in that instance, there's still a lot of power because you're controlling what they are able to do in that regard. So yeah, just having eject on the field, eject in the break zone with CHADley open means that you can kind of control the pace of the game and hopefully cancel some stupid things from happening. Montleonis. So this is a really good card in my opinion. I mean, he's already above curve because he's a 9k 4 CP forward, but then he's also got a really decent pay 0 ability, and then his S is pretty good as well. So his S ability is choose up to 2 forwards opponent controls that deal them 9,000 damage. You can only use his ability whilst Montleonis is attacking. So he's a bit slow in that regard, but if you do happen to do that and your opponent's got a few forwards, you can use CHADley to effectively deal 9k to 4 forwards. Which is, you know, nothing to be snuffed at, and ultimately you could use that over 2 different forwards as well. Over 2 on the same forward. So you can use Montleonis' S ability, then use CHADley to get that back, and then use Montleonis' ability again, so you could deal 18k to 1 forward, and maybe 2 pockets of 9k to 2 different forwards as well. But yeah, I still think it's a strong ability, it just requires Montleonis to be able to attack. X-Death. I love Grand Cross, and, you know, it's not, I mean, it's not fantastic, right? If you Grand Cross and then your opponent's response is, oh, and then I'm going to break X-Death, that kind of sucks. But if you have a better hand advantage, then, you know, it's not the end of the world. You're ultimately emptying your opponent's break zone, get rid of all their backups and all their forwards, and if they are then having to destroy X-Death from their hand, it then means actually you probably have the hand advantage anyway, because X-Death at the very least is probably going to cost your opponent 3 cards from hand. So still, yeah, really, really good in my opinion. And just being able to dull CHADley to then get that S back to your hand is pretty good. Now, the one problem here is the fact that if you're dulling CHADley, that means you're then using one of your lightning backups, at which point you can't, if you've got 5 backups, you can't use that. So you want to make sure to use CHADley on your opponent's turn to then get that X-Death back to hand, ready to have all 5 backups open, ready on your opponent's turn to then use Grand Cross. Or what you could do is use something like CHADley on your turn to get something, or to get X back to hand, and then you can use something like Crow on top of that to then get another card back to hand to then fund the X-Death Grand Cross even more, or just have more cards in hand. So just finding ways to be able to still be able to keep a big hand size whilst also just destroying your opponent's field and your field, because it's Grand Cross. Onion Knight. Yeah, I mean, it kind of fits into an Onion Knight deck because Onion Knights do have a little bit of lightning. Not much, though, not really. But I still think it might be worth it just because it's fun. And being able to cycle constant Onion Knights with CHADley, so use the S ability, get it back to hand, then use it. And then, you know, there's lots of Onion Knights that can play other Onion Knights from your hand. So again, using CHADley to get the Onion Knight back to your hand, play it onto the field, and just keep on cycling. And yeah, just it kind of fits the engine a little bit. Ilua. Very, very strong. I mean, Ilua's S ability is fantastic. Ilua is still a really, really good card. And for an Opus 5 card to stick around for now 11 Opuses, that has a lot to say about how strong this card's effect is. But the S ability is just phenomenal. So, yeah, just having that kind of ability to just say, oh, look, I've got an Ilua in my break zone and I've got CHADley open. Your opponent sees it and goes, oh. And you can just place loads of forwards onto the field. Ilua S, -2k your opponent's boards, all your forwards gain haste. It's just so, so strong. And then if you can use that twice with CHADley as well. So use the S ability, all your forwards gain haste. Use CHADley, get it back. Use S ability again, just to -4k your opponent's side. It's just really, really good. Alright, next up we have Samurai. So a 4 CP fire backup with Dull and put Samurai into the break zone. Choose one forward of cost 4 or less in your break zone and play it onto the field. When it enters the field, if it is a job Samurai or card name Samurai, deal 2000 damage to all the forwards opponent controls. You can only use the ability during your turn. So kind of like a Opus 1 Devout, or there's an Earth one as well, but I can't remember. But it has a bit of a buff for Samurais, and it can only be used on your turn, which is kind of sad, but still really powerful in my opinion, because there's a lot of really strong fire cards that this can bring in, which if you don't have to pay for, is really good. So Yuzuki, being able to cheat in Yuzuki when you are in just a mono fire deck is good, because Yuzuki offers some really good protection for your forwards. So if a fire forward you control is dealt damage by your opponent's abilities, the damage becomes 0 instead. Now it doesn't protect against summons unfortunately, but abilities that is good. So this actually up against you know, another Sam's deck would be quite a good protection, to be honest. Again, maybe something like Storm as well. So if you come up against some wind, so things like Bismarck, it's another great way to be able to reduce that damage coming in. Now, obviously, if you are going up against Samurais, chances are your opponent's going to be running something like CHADley. But if they haven't found it, or even if they have found it, having to combat something like Yuzuki is just another way to be able to mitigate that use of their damage. You know what I mean. Terra, yeah, just be able to bring in Terra to then get another summon to hand to then be able to use that. I mean, it could be a case that your opponent is trying to do something on their turn, on your turn. You can then use Samurai, bring in Terra to then get Amaterasu potentially, or be able to just get Belias to be able to buff something. Either way, just be able to get that summon from the break zone using Samurai and Terra, and not to mention the fact that Terra also increases or will deal 2k damage upon the summon as well is really good, and that swing can be very useful. Alphino. So yeah, just crack Samurai, bring in Alphino, you know, get to search any character from your deck. Just a nice little play. Aegis. So again, being able to play Aegis onto the field to then play another 2 CP forward. Really, really strong. And sorry, you combine that with, I don't know, Soul from Opus 16. You play Aegis to then play Soul, you pay a crystal, you then play another 4 CP forward onto the field. And all it's cost you is cracking your Samurai to play 3 forwards onto cracking your backup and a crystal. But yeah, Aegis into Soul into something else that's big. That's not too bad. Obviously, just don't play it into Shantotos or, you know, other board wipes out there. Cyan, Samurai into, you know, Cyan. You get to deal the 2k ping with Samurai, and then you also get to search yourself another Samurai, and then put that into your hand as well, because Samurais are strong. Varus. Yay, I love Varus. Maybe worth putting into just a water fire deck, just because sometimes when your forwards die, you want to be able to bring them back, and fire does struggle with recursion for the 4 CP forwards. So yeah, using be able to use Samurai to then bring Faris back in and then potentially bring other things in for cheaper or just dealing damage is quite strong, and I think it's probably worth running Samurai in some non-Samurai decks just for this reason, because being able to play those 4 CP forwards, and again Fire has a lot of really strong 4 CP Fire forwards, I personally think it's worth it. Okay, Gladiator. I love this card. Not really that relevant anymore, but still, if you are running some sort of standard units deck, or you've got some powerful standard unit cards, then maybe it's worth it. So he's a 2 CP water backup with a pay 1 water, dull and put Gladiator into the break zone, choose 1 drop standard unit forward, cost 3 less in your break zone, play it onto the field. You can only use this ability during your turn. So Dragoon, I mean, Dragoons do have a little bit of water in them these days, maybe a little bit of wind as well, but, you know, still being able to bring out a Dragoon from your break zone onto the field, I think is worth it. And ultimately, if it's this Dragoon, it means you don't have to worry about playing the Dragoons from hand, keeping them all in the hand. You play this Dragoon on the field, you get to break something, and he gains haste as well, and then you can play more Dragoons onto the field as well, which is something they love to do. Yeah, I just think it's personally quite worth it. Dancer, so obviously works nicely with Dancers because Dancers are primarily water wind, and yeah, just your Dancers end up dying, just be able to recur them onto the field with Gladiators, quite nice. And maybe you don't, or you've got a couple of Dancers on the field but not enough to use Lilith's ability, use Gladiator, bring it back onto the field, do it again, or you want to use a couple of Lilith's abilities, then yeah, it just gives you more to work with. Viking, pretty standard. Yeah, just your Viking ends up dying, use Viking back, or use Gladiator to bring Viking back onto the field, search more Vikings from your deck, or, you know, if you've, you know, rinsed your deck already a lot of Vikings, then be able to bring out the Viking that draws you a card when it both enters and leaves is pretty decent as well. You just need to be careful of obviously milling yourself out, but still a pretty decent play. And yeah, one of the things that I've always found with Vikings is that they struggle a little bit with the recursion, because if you don't get Layla, then you're kind of screwed. So having something like Gladiator to just keep up that recursion as well, I think is well worth it. Cyan. So when Cyan or a job Samurai forward, or a card named Samurai forward, enters your field, choose 1 forward opponent controls to deal 9,000 damage, and then at damage 5, obviously, when Cyan enters the field, you get to remove something. But yeah, having Cyan on the field and then using Gladiator to then bring another Samurai onto the field. Now, you could argue, well, you've got water in your deck if you're running Samurais, but it might not be a primarily Samurais deck, but you could be running a couple of Samurais just because they work so well with this Cyan. And yeah, I think just be able to crack your Gladiator, bring it on, maybe got just some weird sort of water, fire, Samurai deck going on, you know, they're not, I mean, I guess most of a Samurai deck does have mostly Samurais, but you could be running some other sort of kind of weird breed of it, and, you know, that's what this show's all about, is just trying out stupid, weird things, because who knows what's out there. Sometimes you come across these weird combos and it turns out they're broken, and they're things that no one's considered before, and it turns out it just makes a deck stronger. I doubt this is the one, but, you know, still fun. And Lael. So, when Lael or a forward enters your field, place 1 bearer counter on Lael, remove 3 bearer counters from Lael, choose 1 forward, remove it from the game. You can only use the ability whilst Lael is attacking. So, you could use a little bit of tech here and attack with Lael when he's only got 2 counters on, and then use Gladiator to bring in another standard unit forward. That gives Lael 3 counters, at which point you can then use 3 to remove them. So, your opponent would have to respond at that point of the forward entering, or using Gladiator, obviously. If they can't, then that's pretty good. Summoner. So, yeah, this is a pretty strong card. So, pay 1, dull, and put someone into break zone. Choose up to 2 ice summons in your break zone. Add them to your hand. 2 ice summons? Yeah, I mean, that's really good. And the fact that, yeah, it costs you an additional CP to be able to play this, as opposed to the Black Mage, which gets you a nice summon for your break zone, but you have to pay 2 for that Black Mage, whereas you only have to pay for 1 for this. So realistically, as long as you're paying the CP, well, the CP for the cost of the card and the abilities actually works out the same. The only difference is that this has a bit more of a limitation on its entry, but, you know, still, I think it's really, really good, and be able to get 2 back to hand is well worth it. So, Levnato, yeah, you crack your summoner to get 2 summons back to your hand, you then play Levnato, you now have the 2 summons in hand to trigger Levnato's ability, and get to break a dull forward. Terror, surprise, surprise. Again, you break a summoner to get those summons back to hand. You play Terror, you then get to show 2 summons or maybe more, and then you can dull and freeze as many summons as you have in hand. A pretty standard ability, but still really powerful. Blaster, again, a bit of a strange one, but so when Blaster enters the field, choose one card in your damage zone, add it to your hand, and put one card from your hand into the damage zone. Its EX burst effect will not trigger. And then the forwards you control gain plus 2,000 power for every 3 cards with EX burst in your damage zone. So there are quite a few. I mean, I'm basing this on the Shiva deck that I built, right? Which, if you haven't seen the deck profile on, go watch that profile. But being able to get either the cards out of your break zone to then put into your damage zone, so you have more EXs there, ready for Blaster to buff everything, is pretty good. But also just being able to get those out of your damage zone into your hand, and then when they do eventually end up in the break zone, still be able to use Summoner to then recur them back to your hand. And if that, that card is there, then it's always sucky when you see the cards that you really want in damage. So being able to use Last to be able to get that and then cast it, goes in the break zone, get it back to hand using Summoner, keep doing it, and just keep offending your opponent. Ajidu Marajidu. So these are very similar sorts of cards. Obviously you've got Ajidu, which will get you back two summons back to your hand, and then you've got Summoner, which is the exact same thing, but maybe you're breaking the Summoner to get those 2 summons back to hand, and then you cast, or you play Ajidu to then just get 2 more back to hand, I don't know, or you just use Ajidu to then be able to cast a summon for free, and you've made the room with your backups because you've broken your Summoner for that. And summons, ice summons, there are quite a few powerful ones as well, but it might just be casting a simple little 1 CP summon, simple 2 CP summon, who knows, but yeah, be able to get the backup down and then casting a big summon, and hopefully just destroying your opponent's board. Halicarnassus, you get the 2 summons back to hand, you can then dull Halicarnassus, discard 2 summons, choose one forward, break it. So similar to Levnato, but in this instance you can use a action ability just to break any forward, as opposed to making sure that forward is dull. Garnet, so you add 2 summons to your hand, at which point you can use Garnet's dull ability to randomly reveal 1 card from your hand. If it's a summon, you can cast it without paying the cost, which is pretty good. And obviously having 2 more summons in your hand is kind of hedging your bets a little bit. And maybe you've just worked it so that you have nothing else but summons in your hand, and then you use Garnet's ability to reveal, and hey presto, you get to cast Summon. And also Summoner is good because it can get the same 2 summons. So if you've got 2 1 cost Opus 15 Shiva, you get them back to your hand, you then use Garnet, and then it's either one of those cards, doesn't matter, because they're the same thing, same effects, you still get to use the effect and cast it for free. Braska. So yeah, I mean, Braska's S ability is already really, really powerful, but being able to use Summoner to get back 2 summons to your hand to then use them as fodder for Braska's S is really good. Now, obviously Grand Summon requires fire, wind, and water, none of which elements are ice, so the chances of you using that in ice are pretty slim, but still, being able to use just his Summon S to just discard a summon, deal 7k to something is really strong, and you're basically at this juncture using Summoner to get you 2 summons back to hand, to then deal 14k to something, so realistically it's still quite strong anyway, and maybe you've got some sort of weird tech deck anyway, and you can actually still use Grand Summon if you really want to, but yeah, still fun. And then finally Doned, and I believe Doned is like the only wind backup that actually has any recursion. I'm struggling to think, I've struggled to find any others, but yeah, ultimately Doned, you can pay a wind and dull, put Doned into the break zone, and choose 1 category FFTA card in your break zone, add it to your hand, and then when Doned enters the field, you may search for 1 card named Marsh or Monster and add it to your hand. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the dull ability first, and then I'll talk about his versatility after. So Gladiator, an FFTA card, and Gladiator is really strong. You play it onto the field at damage 5, you can put it into the break zone, all your forwards gain Brave and plus 10,000 power. That is just silly. And yeah, being able to get that back to your hand and then use it again on the following turn, I think is really, really good. So yeah, to be able to use Donut to recur that, to play it again, even though Gladiator will end up breaking, unfortunately, just giving your forwards more power and Brave, and just keep on swinging through. Exodus. So again, Doned can actually get to any FFTA card, so that includes some of the summons as well. And Exodus is an okay card. Choose 1 forward you control until the end of the turn. It gains plus 3,000 power and Brave, and this forward cannot become dull by your opponent's summons or abilities. And I think that's the key point there, is being able to make it so your forwards can't become dull. So if you're up against lightning or ice, that would be very useful. And if your opponent is at damage 5, you get to apply that effect to all of your forwards. So if your opponent plays a card, say let's go with Opus 16 Shantoto, and they remove from the game, they try to dull everything, and then you go, okay, I'll use Doned to get back Exodus, and then cast Exodus, you're on damage 5, none of my forwards become dull. So that could be a good counterplay ultimately. Sid Randall. One of the problems with Sid Randall is the fact that he's just too damn fragile. So being able to get him back to hand, play him back on the field, and your opponent's like, I just want to get rid of this card, might be a decent play. If your opponent relies a lot on entry abilities, which, you know, most decks do, being able to just stop those from happening, and then if you combo that with other forms of mitigation as well, so maybe you got something like White Tiger Sea to try and hamper the summons, you might have something like Cecil, so when things get targeted, they have to pay too. So you could kind of put this into a really horrible kind of nope deck, and yeah, just being able to get back Sid Randall when he ultimately will die, I think is well worth it. Atomos, so let's focus on what he can search now, and yeah, Doned into Atomos, it's a no-brainer. Atomos is a stupidly good card, and just being able to pay a 4 CP backup, even turn 1 to get Atomos to hand, probably isn't the worst thing in the world, because you can technically then during each turn when you've cast a second card you've cast, yeah, so you'd need Atomos to be on the field already, so you couldn't Doned then Atomos to then reactivate Doned, unfortunately, but ultimately you can still use Doned to search Atomos, and it's just really good because you want to find Atomos early because he's a really good card. So is Typhon. Not much more to say, really. Ochu, again, really strong card. Let's say you've got one other backup, you play Doned to get your Ochu, you play Ochu onto the field, you get to reactivate the backup used to Dolph, play Ochu as well as Doned, and then play more things. Again, no brainer. Super simple, and Wynn just loves reactivation. Wynn is strong. Blue Worm. Other monsters that are really good for it. So Doned can ultimately go get yourself a Blue Worm, you play that onto the field, and then it can go and block it when you want it to, or just draw yourself a card. Oh, not or, you get to just draw yourself a card regardless, but yeah, it could be an attacker as well if you manage to wipe your opponent's field. Magic Pot, because Magic Pot is fantastic, and there are some really good Magic Pot abilities at the moment. With every deck that you find, or every set you find more of the same cards coming out, Magic Pot becomes even stronger. Yeah, Magic Pot is slow, but if you have Magic Pot on the field already, and then you play a really powerful card with a strong entry ability, then use Magic Pot to do it again, even better. And what's better is that Doned can search you a March, which can be the Opus 16 Water March, which plays a 2 CP onto the field. So you could have used Doned maybe to search you a Magic Pot earlier, and then you get March to hand, you play March onto the field, you then use Magic Pot to break the March, and then play another March onto the field, and you see where I'm going with this. It just kind of works nicely with itself. Zoo. So put Zoo into the break zone, activate all the backups you control, so, and then you can discard Zoo and choose up to 2 backups you control, activate them. So you could play Doned onto the field and then get your Zoo to hand, then just discard it, just to reactivate more backups and keep playing more things if you really wanted to. And there we go, folks. A bit of a weird one, this this episode, yeah. But I wanted to focus on some bit more niche and weirder cards rather than just going on the meta stuff, especially after the last episode. But yeah, Opus 16 is shaping up to be a really powerful set, and yeah, it's really good. It's a lot of fun. I don't really have much more to say than that, so I'll see you later. Bye.